Testing. Okay, looks like it's good. All right, we're going to get started. I have a lot of materials today. Smaller crowd, so it's good. My name is Darmadi Komo. Very excited that be able to share with you guys private cloud. The printout in the conference guide is a bit not right because we put 2012. We're actually going to show you 2014, SQL Server 2014. Is that okay? We didn't have time. We didn't know that we're going to announce it this week, the CTP and all that. So when we submit the content, we put 2012. But surprise, we're going to show you a lot of 2014, right? Obviously, we're going to talk about virtualization, private cloud. So I want to do a quick show of hand. How many of you guys virtualize SQL Server today? More than half. Okay, that's good. Is it in production or is it development? Production? Yes? Okay, that's good. So every year when I do this thing, I always ask this question, and it started with like one person only, and now it's half of the room usually. Back in the States when we did this session, it's a little bit more than a half as well. So that's good. That's good to know that everybody is virtualizing SQL Server, because we want to make sure that all the hardware that you have, you want to make full use of it, right? So we're going to start looking at the agenda. We're going to talk about Microsoft Data Platform overall. I have just quick 2 slides on that. We're going to talk about the better together. This is where I'm going to talk about not SQL Server features, but Windows Server and System Center features that help SQL Server, right? Especially on the private cloud. And Madan is going to come and talk to you about how SQL Server 2014, there are a number of new features in the product that be able to enhance the private cloud implementation, right? As well as what we term hybrid cloud. Okay, so we're going to have definition, things like that on hybrid cloud. So this is agenda. We'll have demos. We're going to show you a bunch of features. So let's get going. The first slide is kind of busy, but I want to point out a couple things here. So in here you have your yellow box and the blue box. The yellow box is something that we used to have, where you have traditional data center, where you install SQL Server non-virtualized or virtualized, like what you have seen. Okay, this is where you put all your software in your own data center. On the right side here, on the blue boxes, those are things that you put in the cloud, in the public cloud, right? Either Microsoft Azure or hosting providers or Amazon, you name it, right? Doesn't matter. What we're trying to show you is whether or not you're running things on your own data center or on the cloud, SQL Server has empowered all this technology that runs across, right? Same SQL Server technology that runs from your traditional data center to private cloud to public cloud, right? So we want to stress that you don't need to use different tools, things like that, because the same technology exists whether you run it on the yellow boxes to the blue boxes, right? So I have here in the list on the very bottom all kinds of things here. So let me just go quickly what it means. This is the first box, SQL Server running on traditional Windows Server. So this is what we used to do, and we've been doing that for a long time. We have HT Insight, which is our Hadoop implementation, is in preview today, that runs on Windows Server. We have PDW, which is a specialized appliance for data warehouse, hundreds of terabytes data warehouse implementation. We have that in the appliance, and it runs based on SQL Server technology as well. When you first start virtualize SQL Server, you will have SQL Server running on Windows Server VM, running Hyper-V, or you can run it on VMware or Citrix, right? Doesn't matter. But SQL Server can run very well on virtualized environment, right? And then when you start moving from here to public cloud, we just launched about 2 months ago our IaaS offering in Windows Azure, meaning that you can run full copy of SQL Server in Azure. How many of you actually tried this in public cloud? None of you yet, okay? Still new. We have tremendous growth. Madan is actually the PM for this, and he just, we just look at the numbers and all that stuff. The growth is just phenomenal for the last 2 months, right? So essentially, the difference between these two is The first one, the second one is SQL Server, full SQL Server copies running on virtualized environment. One is in your data center, one is in Azure environment. Same SQL Server, same way for you to interact. You have full feature and all that, right? And then we have this thing called SQL Database Service, which is, in the past, we call it SQL Azure. It's our past offerings, right? We hide a lot of the complexity behind the scene. So we just give you the database, but built in HA and all kinds of things. What you do have is full-fledged SQL Server-based technology that you can just use as a database, right? And then the HT Insight also appears in Azure as well. You can run it on your own data center, or you can run it in Azure, right? So same kind of deal. And then you'll see here that we have a lot of new BI features. This is not a BI topic, but I just want to put it there, that SQL Server not only has the OLTP, but you have data warehouse, but also has BI component, right? We all know that. So it all runs in Azure. And then finally, if you run SQL Server in a hosting environment, like let's say Amazon and people like that, you have that running in a virtualized environment as well. So same SQL Server technologies that runs across all these different environments, right? So we want to make sure that you use the same common tool, right? Either you run it on-prem or you run it in the cloud, doesn't matter, right? So we want to make sure that you have the same development tool, the SSDT, same management tool like SSMS, same identity infrastructure like Active Directory and all that, and same virtualization stack, right? Same Hyper-V stack that you can move across, right? Single vendor support. Okay, so this is good because I'm going to basically tee up this for Madan, because what he's going to talk about a lot today, not only on private cloud, but on the hybrid cloud. Hybrid cloud meaning that you have some stuff running here and some stuff running there, and you want to be able to work between the two environments seamlessly. Right? You'll see later that SQL Server 2014 has many, many features on hybrid cloud. Right? We want to make sure that you can leverage both sides of the world. Maybe you put some of the data in your own private data center and move some of them in public cloud and vice versa. Right? So we share with you the features and the tools that allows you to do that. Okay? So that's why we put this slide so that we understand where is the hybrid cloud, where is the private cloud, and where is the public cloud. Okay? All right. So we're going to transition now on the main topic here on the Better Together. So what I'm going to do now is to go through with you 5 slides on how SQL Server, Windows Server, and System Center, those 3 products, and Azure work together, right? And when you put all this together, it will become much, much better, right? So I'm going to group them into different categories, starting from scale, performance, availability, storage, and management, right? I'm going to have detailed slide on each one of those, right? And we can go through this. I mentioned earlier that the features that I'm going to mention here will be Windows Server features, will be System Center features that helps SQL Server, right? So when you actually have the combination between the 3 products, leverage all the functionality since you already have it. SQL Server runs on Windows Server anyway, so you want to be able to take advantage of that. Right? Some of you probably knows about this, so let's just keep going. The first one on scale. Right? So I have 4 points here. The first one is obviously the virtual processor, right? We used to support only 4 virtual processors before. With the latest Windows Server, we can go up to 64, right? So now you can actually put your mission-critical SQL Server in Hyper-V, right? So you can run up to 64 virtual processor, right? You can run all kinds of application there, and each VM can run up to 1 terabyte of memory. So it's huge, right? So now you can put large VM running SQL Server, right? Even your most mission critical, you can potentially put that in here. So 16 times much better than our previous version of Windows Server, okay? The second one, if you're not comfortable running in virtualization, if you have like, let's say if for people coming from US, you're a NASDAQ, right? You want to maybe run only a single application do like real-time trading and all kinds of things, only one server, you can run now up to 640 logical processors, non-virtualized environment, right? So SQL Server now can support this. This is going to be a huge, giant machine that basically run one single SQL Server application, right? The next one, you'll see later on the private cloud implementation that we would like you to actually group all your servers, your SQL Server together into a cluster environment to become a SQL Server farm, we call it, right? Once you have SQL Server farm, you want to be able to cluster them all together and all that. Now SQL Server supports up to 64 nodes now. So imagine 64 nodes of SQL Server empowering your entire company, right? So you can basically run it in this kind of fashion, right? 4 times increase from previous version of Windows. And then if you run on VM itself, right? Hyper-V now supports up to 8,000 VM per cluster, right? So you can run small SQL Server application, big ones, doesn't matter. You can all fit in one cluster, right? So this, this example of Windows Server features, a lot of them are not possible in the previous version of Windows Server. Now it's possible with Windows Server 2012, right? I'm going to share with you some of the Windows Server 2012 R2 that's coming up. Now it's in preview this week. You all been to the keynote this week, right? So you hear about the preview. Definitely download those. But even with the current version of Windows Server, you can get all of this thing. Okay? You can get all these enhancements. All right? So that's on the scaling portion of things. All right? So next one. On the performance. A lot of probably you guys know about SQL Server already support NUMA architecture in the past. When you install SQL Server natively in Windows Server, the NUMA architecture gets surfaced and they'll be able to optimize, increase the performance and all that. In the latest Windows Server, on Hyper-V, it also surfaced the NUMA configuration. Right? So now within Hyper-V, you can actually optimize SQL Server based on your NUMA configuration. A lot of the new servers today, when you buy new servers, actually has NUMA architecture in there. So SQL Server will automatically take care of that for you, be able to increase performance there. Right? So that's on the first one. The second one, network bandwidth, the QoS or quality of service. This is again part of Windows Server. You can now basically enforce certain network bandwidth, let's say certain percentage that goes through your network card based on different traffic, different application. Let's say SQL Server, let's say you have same SQL Server running in the same host with, let's say, your file and print or other things. You can actually make sure that the performance of SQL Server network is always up to a certain part. Later, Madan going to demonstrate to you another feature of SQL Server 2014 that actually will be able to help on the IOPS, right? Be able to do enforcing on the IOPS, right? So we're going to see that later. The next one, Windows NIC teaming. I'm very excited about this one. This allows you to join multiple network cards together in Windows Server and then treat them as one logical unit. You can actually use it as a load balancing so that you can increase the network performance from SQL Server. Let's say your SQL Server is very network heavy, right? So it transfers a lot of the data with the network. You can now increase that by using NIC teaming, or you can use that as failover, right? So you can basically control those very easily in Windows Server 2012 that enhance the performance of SQL Server, right, on the networking portion. Okay, so those on the key performance area. I'm going to move on to the next one, which is availability, right? Some of these features, since we released maybe like almost a year ago, some of you probably would know, some of you probably don't know. The very first one, cluster-aware updating, allows us to update SQL Server cluster automatically, right, without downtime. Basically, it's doing a rolling patches, right? We know that SQL Server, I don't see we actually released a lot of patches in the last couple years, and a lot of the patches actually is the OS patches. But if SQL Server running on the OS, when you have to patch the server, you have to make sure that the SQL Server is always up and running. So you employ this rolling update mechanism. Now you can do that automatically here using Windows Server 2012, right?
Is there a connection between cluster we are updating and system center product?
Which System Center product? For updates? Use SMS? The SMS portion of the features is separate from this window. This is part of Windows Server, right? I don't know what's the latest SMS will be able to take care of this or not, but this is part of Windows Server 2012. So it's probably different from what the technology that you mentioned, right? The next one, dynamic quorum, right? This is very essential if you employ SQL Server Always On, right? Or SQL Server Always On, if you've been to the session of Always On, the underlying technology is the clustering portion, right? One of the things that you do when you make sure that the cluster is always up and running is to make sure you have enough quorum, right? And in the past, you have to basically manually do this quorum assignment and all that, right? In Windows Server 2012, you can do this dynamically. It's happened automatically in the background, so that increase the availability of the entire cluster itself, right? One PM from our SQL Server Customer Advisory team, Sanjay, he told me that just by using this feature alone, dynamic quorum, it saves 80% of the manual work to configure the clustering, right? So definitely make use of this. You increase not only the availability, but actually decrease the work needed for you to configure the quorum. Okay? There's a session this week on running SQL Server on Windows Server Core, right? So definitely attend that. But this is essentially what we want you to run SQL Server in production, right? So if you have SQL Server today, and Windows Server has two modes, right? One is the full GUI mode that you can use mouse and things like that to interact with it. The other one is kind of like command line mode, which is Windows Server Core, right? Windows Server Core has less things that it deploys, so that when you do patches, it will be less patches, right? There is less surface for attacks, things like that. And with Windows Server 2012, you can switch between the Windows Server Core mode to the full GUI mode back and forth. In the past, you have to either install a full GUI, and if you want to go to Server Core, you have to reinstall Windows, and vice versa, right? In Windows Server 2012, now we allow you to switch back and forth. So imagine when you deploy SQL Server in production, you might want to start, let's say, with the full GUI, but when you're ready to turn on production, you turn it to Windows Server Core, right? So that keep the functionality, SQL Server will be happily running, but reduce the amount of surface for attacks, reduce the amount of patches needed for Windows Server, right? There's a number here about 50-60% less, right? So definitely increase the availability of your SQL Server running here, right? So this, few tricks here that I mentioned already can increase the availability of SQL Server, right? The next one here, how many of you heard about online VHDX resize? Few of you, right? So it's a very good feature that's coming up in R2, now it's in preview, that essentially allow you to resize your VHD file without shutting down the VM, right? And it's very cool because a lot of times SQL Server is using storage and all that. Let's say your TempDB is full, let's say your log file is full, whatever. You want to increase the size there. It's easily for you to do that without shutting down the VM, right? So the SQL Server will continue to run. It will not notice anything at all because this happened behind the scene, right? So this is only the R2 feature. No, you can still store your data files in the shared storage, like you mentioned. But let's say your TempDB, your things that is not really, yeah, yep, then you can put it locally, right? Because a lot of times, especially today, even my demo laptop has SSD drives, right? I want to have high-speed SSD drive. So for those of you who, and obviously you've seen SQL Server 2014 in-memory OLTP stuff, if you have SSD drive, that will help increase performance tremendously, right? Things like that. So you want to be able to just use the regular best practice of SQL Server, move the data, maybe data files in the shared storage, but some of the TempDB in the local disk type of thing, right? So that will speed things a lot. There is another feature of SQL Server 2014 that Madan will share with you that will help extend the buffer, make use of this as well, right? So, all right. Any other question? Okay. Let's move on to storage. This is a very interesting one as well. You've been in the keynote this week, right? So Jeff Woolsey demonstrate SQL Server I/O basically runs against SMB as well as the tiered storage space, right? You probably remember in the keynote, right? So let me recap what it is. So SMB storage is allowing you now to put your data and log file remotely, right? You don't have to be locally, or you don't have to be in the cluster environment like this gentleman said, right? Can be just any file server, right? And Windows Server 2012 has all kinds of availability feature on the SMB portion that gives you the same protection as well as speed. That reduce your storage cost tremendously. If you worry about SAN storage being very expensive, this is the way to go, right? Same performance, same availability, things like that, but gives you great flexibility. Now in the VM, the Hyper-V, we now able for you to actually connect directly to fiber channel. Right, so this is good, right? So for those of you who use SAN, this is cool. In the VM, that you can do directly to the SAN channel directly. In SQL Server 2014, we're going to support the new file system from Windows. Windows Server 2012 come out with this REFS file system, or resilient file system. Essentially, it is much better than NTFS. It's backward compatible with NTFS, but it's much better because there's more checksum in the background to make sure that things are not corrupted, right? We don't want corrupted database, right? So we want to make sure that all our database is always have checksum and things like that. In 2014, we're going to support that right out of the box. It's something that you just install and it works right away. You don't have to do some configuration, right? I want to talk about tier storage spaces, which is something that we're going to ship in R2 of Windows Server. You saw the demo, increased the performance tremendously, right? But essentially, behind the scene, if you look at the graph here, Windows Server will automatically move data blocks between your SSD tier to your regular disk tier, depending on the access pattern, right? Automatically, right? So if your SQL Server, let's say you do data warehouse, right? You have many partitions, right, on your table. Maybe your most frequently accessed partitions, Windows Server will move them into SSD drive, and your least frequently used partition, they'll move that into regular disk. Not only just save space, because you can optimize in terms of the storage, but also increase the capacity, right? Every time you want to query something that is very relevant, you query that a lot of times, put in SSD tier, right? It will increase the performance tremendously, right? So you'll see us, this is like a trend. You'll see that not only we supporting storage tiering using SSD, but a lot of the features in SQL Server 2014 will make use of SSD, right? Madan going to talk about some of those later as well, right? So SSD is the way to go. Like for example, my little laptop here, I have a hybrid SSD drive, right? So there's a big cache in front of my regular disk from, I guess, one of the storage vendors like Seagate. Basically allows you to have the capacity of a regular disk, but the speed of SSD, right? And there's different enterprise grade and lower grade of SSD drive that you can purchase today. Definitely consider that because all the new software that comes out of us will make use of those, okay? All right. On the bottom here, there's lab validation. Basically, our team, Windows Server team, basically did benchmark on this. So you can go look at the white paper when you download the deck and see the benchmark that we did with Windows Server 2012 and SQL Server 2012. Okay? The next one on management, right? So we always put management at the end, but management is actually very important because it helps you to have the operations ongoing and all that stuff after you do deployment, right? So I'm going to highlight a couple products from System Center. When you buy System Center today, it comes with all different products, and I'm going to highlight a few of them here that relates to private cloud, that relates to SQL Server. The first one is Virtual Machine Manager and App Controller, right? Virtual Machine Manager is a thick client base managing all your VMs. App Controller is browser-based. It's also managing your VM, but allows you to manage your VM from your private cloud environment to your public cloud, to Azure or to your service provider and all that, right? App Controller is a good tool for you to move the VMs back and forth. It has functionality to do that. It's very easy, point and click. So for those of you who are a little bit, I asked you guys earlier if you guys run Azure, you're not. If you want to learn Azure, this is a good tool for you to basically hide all the complexity of Azure, right? To move the VMs back and forth, right? These two, Operations Manager and Advisor, Operations Manager is nothing new. It's Operations Manager is a long time. We already shipped that many versions. It's basically an agent-based things that you install in SQL Server. It grabs all the counters, and you can monitor multiple SQL servers using that. Advisor is a cloud-based architecture. Basically allows you to proactively monitor your SQL Server installation, right? Basically, you install a little agent there. It basically collect data and send it to Microsoft. Microsoft will compare what the data that you have, the configuration, with our best practices, and we will send you alerts before your problems happens, right? So Advisor is a very good tool for you to troubleshoot before the problem occurs, right? So it'll tell you, oh, probably you're going to run out of this space soon, or probably your temp DB is growing like so big that you need to basically do something about it, or maybe your configuration settings on SQL Server is not optimum, so we'll send you that information, send you alert before the problem occurs. And this is very good news, right? So you don't want to have always troubleshooting things when things break. Before it breaks, Advisor will help you to do that, right? So it's part of System Center, and if you buy System Center with software assurance, you have this capability. Okay?
Can you configure the advisor? Give me some configuration, say I would like to get information regarding to my specific set of how the installation should look like?
Yeah. There are multiple ways to configure Advisor because a lot of times your database server, you want to be behind the firewall. You don't want to be able to just connect to the internet and send files to Microsoft, for example. So we allow you to put it in a central location. Let's say you have another server, central location that collects this data, and that becomes your proxy to communicate with our Advisor in the cloud, right, that way. Advisor supports SQL Server and Windows Server best practices today. And we'll continue to keep enhancing those and add new products into it. But the difference between Advisor and Operations Manager is Operations Manager is doing monitoring. Advisor is doing proactive monitoring, right? So additional enhancements there that allows you to troubleshoot things before it happens. Okay? The next one, this is more on the backup portion, right? SQL Server has backup solution. Madan's going to talk about new backup solution from SQL Server 2014. But there is a product here, System Center Data Protection Manager, that allows you to basically centralize all your SQL Server backups into one location, right? So it knows how to back up all your Microsoft-based stuff like SharePoint, Exchange, Windows Server, SQL Server, and all that put it in a centralized location, or you can put that in the cloud. So the new version support cloud as well. Right? So there are many ways System Center can help you to make sure your management is better when you run SQL Server in your enterprise. Right? Essentially, this is that. All right, so we finished this, and I'm going to transition into another busy slide. And let me look at the time. Okay, so we're going to spend about 5 minutes here. What I do is I put together the one that we talk about, the Better Together, into a framework. We call it SQL Server for Private Cloud. Right? I updated it to SQL Server 2014 here. And it's basically a framework for you to deploy SQL Server in your private cloud. Right? It's a guide. You can call it a reference architecture framework. Right? Allows you to basically go through this step by step. And we have 4 steps over here. Right? We have the first one called resource pooling. Basically, we want you, the first step is to consolidate all your existing database and put it in one single location, right? And then we want you to configure elasticity, meaning that you want to configure making sure that it can scale up and down, things like that, highly available, has DR environment set up. And then once you've done that, we want to be able to allow your end user to be able to deploy the VM automatically without IT intervention. And finally, we want you to be able to measure the usage as well, right? So you have 4 steps here. First step is to consolidate. Second, to make sure it's elastic. Third step is to make sure that it has self-service. The fourth step is to measure the usage so you can optimize further, right? Each one of them has its own benefit, right? I won't go into very detail here, but it essentially maps directly to the steps, right? So just quickly, the first step, resource pooling, the benefit obviously is to reduce the number of servers, right? The capital expenses, right? And probably operations expenses because you combine everything together. You will create green IT, things like that, right? So each one of them has benefit. And there are steps for each of those things. And it's very small. I know that you cannot see, but when you get the deck, you'll be able to fully appreciate it. What I do here is I have all the steps outlined here on the left column and the tools that you're going to use, right, on the right column. So for example, the very first one, let me just describe to you. First, before you actually do anything on private cloud, you need to discover what you have, right? How many of you familiar with our Microsoft Assessment and Planning Toolkit map? Only 4 of you. Okay, so I'm going to hopefully share with you more and maybe do a little demo on you to let you see what it is. Right? Essentially, you want to know what you have first because you might have SQL Server installed in this server, that server, you don't know, right? So you want to be able to find out what it is and you want to consolidate. You want to make sure that it's becoming a virtualized SQL Server and things like that. That's the first step, right? Essentially, right? The second step on the elasticity, I have couple things there, and again, I won't go into very detail here. You can read it, and a lot of the features that we're going to talk about is going to be in Madan's section. But essentially, first, you want to make sure that once you pull all your SQL Server in one location, you set up high availability, right? Because it's very important to make sure that if this is down, that you have another server to take care of it, high availability. You also want to make sure that you set up disaster recovery. In case your data center is compromised, you want to make sure that you'll be able to failover or have disaster recovery on the remote side. Right? A lot of times, customer will build one data center here, another data center in another location to protect their infrastructure, right? There's a way for you also to actually use Windows Azure as your data disaster recovery. Madan's going to hopefully talk about that later as well. So then you set up high availability, you set up disaster recovery. Then you want to make sure that your VMs can scale up and down. So a lot of features here Madan's going to talk about in here. So I'm not going to talk about a lot, right? Be able to scale your CPU, your memory, your storage, and your networking, basically, right? So you want to make sure your infrastructure is very, very cool. After you've done that, you have virtualized your environment, you have set up elasticity. The next one is to make sure that you will create self-service. How many of you familiar with sysprep? Maybe half of you, right? Essentially, it's a faster way for us to deploy multiple SQL servers using pre-built images, right? So you basically, you do a sysprep on SQL Server, you basically install all the bits first, and then you do the post-installation, which is just to have machine-specific information there, bypassing all the complexity of the install and the time-consuming of the install, right? So there are a number of features that Madan is going to talk about on sysprep that we enhanced in SQL Server 2014, so I'm going to leave that for him. But the next one I want to talk about here is automation. Once you have your SQL Server deployed in your private cloud environment, you want to make sure that you have a tool. In here it's called Windows Azure Pack that allows you to manage those infrastructure. You assign, let's say, a cost associated to each VM. You want to assign templates. You want to assign your infrastructure, like different security for different users, things like that. All those things are available as part of Windows Azure Pack. Right now it's going to be in preview. You're going to have RTM probably towards the end of the year, kind of thing, right? So it's basically Windows Azure Pack is a free download that sits on top of your Windows Server, your System Center, and SQL Server that manages all those in the private cloud environment, right? The user interface for Windows Azure Pack, it looks exactly like Windows Azure, right? So if you run it in your private cloud environment, it looks exactly like in the public cloud, right? So you have familiarity, things like that. So it's very, very good for us so you can have the same experience. Okay, once you have that, then finally the same tool, Windows Azure Pack, allows you to assign costs. It will give you reports on the usage of your VMs and all that stuff. So as an IT person, you don't have to like worry about, okay, this department is using how many hours, this department is using how many storage, blah, blah, blah. All those things will be kept and then be able to report those for you in real time. So it's very, very cool, right? It basically produces OLAP cubes. So a lot of you probably knows how to deal with OLAP cubes, either using Excel to create nice charts and things like that. You can do a report out of that, right? So this is a framework. I cover it very quickly for you to be able to basically do private cloud using SQL Server, right? And Windows Server and System Center, right? So basically take this, use it as a guide. Later at the end, I'll show you the white paper that we produced based on this as well. Okay? So what I'm going to do next is actually to talk about one specific tool. Only a few of you raised your hand. So I'm going to talk about more detail, which is Microsoft Assessment and Planning Toolkit. It's a free download. If you type Microsoft.com/map, you'll see the latest version. Download it. It's a free install. You install. What it does is basically it will be able to help you find out how many of the SQL servers that you have in your organization, right? What version it is and all kinds of things, right? For you to have a planning purposes. I don't know about you, but how many times we want to know, hey, how many copies of SQL Server that I have and what versions, what services that is running, things like that. All the reports, that's very useful for me, right? That I can keep as an IT person, right? So now Microsoft gives you this tool, right? The latest edition is 8.0. That's what you can download. But what I'm going to demonstrate to you is the beta version of 8.5, which is the preview, right? So I'm going to demonstrate that to you. Okay. All right, so I'm going to launch the map toolkit. It's 8.5. Essentially, this is a tool I mentioned. It gives you a lot of the reporting capabilities, right? So first of the things that you can see here on this side is the database portion, right? In here, I already did my scanning. It's just using the sample database. So in here, you'll see that I can scan SQL Server, obviously. I can also have this report on which one of the SQL Server that I have is ready for me to move to Azure, right? Based on different criteria and all that. So it does that automatically. I can also scan other databases like MySQL, Oracle, and Sybase product, right? So if you have those as well, you can do scanning and find out what it is, right? So if I click on this, it shows me how many SQL Server version, right? Can go up to like SQL 2000. So if you have old SQL Server running, this thing still can scan, be able to find out what it is, right? And what kind of edition, very important, right? So you want to know how many of them are enterprise, one of them are in workgroup, and how many of them are developer or free edition, right? And this is just from the tool itself. If I generate reports here, what it does is it generate Excel file for me to be able to keep that report later on. So I already generate those, and I'm going to share a couple of them for you. The first one is this, right? Just a summarize of what you have in SQL Server and the instances, right? The instance name, version, and the product name, and so on and so forth. It gives you if I use service pack or not. So a lot of the information, even the configuration information, as well as the component, right? What kind of components that I'm using as part of my installation. Because SQL Server, you can turn on all these things, but you don't know how many copies. Using this tool to scan, you basically allows you to give you the right report, right? It's very, very cool way to do that, right? So this is one way to assess SQL Server. There's also details version as well on the same report, where you actually can see SQL Server summary, how many databases in there, the product name. On the database itself, within the database, you can see the size of the database, the log file size and all that, how many usage percentage, right, things like that, compatibility level. So you'll be able to scan all these things as well, and on the instance level itself, because you might have one copy of SQL Server, but you create many instances with different service pack, different CLI version, and is it integrated security and all that. All the details that you can think of, as well as the property. Right? This is as a DBA, I want to look at all my SQL Server that I install with all the properties within that SQL Server, right? So it's very, very cool way for me to find out those things, right? So it's very, very useful, right? It's amazing that how many details that this tool can help you basically grab, right? So with that, I'm going to switch back to the slide here. Two more slides. First is the benchmark that I talk about. Yes? If you are part of the Connect, you can access to the Connect site, connect.microsoft.com. You can actually download that as part of your free evaluation. Right? But it's in preview, so it's not totally finished yet. Right? So now you can run 8.0. You can download that publicly. But for 8.5, it's probably going to be available in the next few months, the final. Yeah, but you can play with it. Yes. Going back here, this is the report that we did on Windows Server 2012 running Hyper-V with SQL Server 2012. Essentially, what we show here in the chart is as you increase the number of virtual processor in Hyper-V that's running SQL Server, the performance increased linearly, right? Almost linearly. And then the average transaction response per second drops, right? So meaning that you can basically have more transaction per second if you increase the virtual processor. This is good news, right? You can scale, right? You can scale a SQL Server that way. So look at the benchmark report that we have. We showed this last year. I'm just going to put it in the slide that we can have one VM running 1 million IOPS. Right? So if you're here in Amsterdam, actually last year we showed that in the keynote. All right, so with that, let me turn over to Madan, who's going to talk to you about SQL Server 2014 features that's on private cloud and hybrid cloud. Madan?
All right. Thanks, Marty. As he introduced, my name is Madan. I'm a program manager in SQL Server on the product development side. What I wanted to start by showing is how many of you watched the Rasinovich's presentation on Windows Azure Infrastructure Services. Yeah, I mean, I would recommend you guys to watch the recording. It actually talks about the symmetry that Dharmadi talked about, the fact that you can take a SQL Server, run on premises and on Azure. The symmetry, basically the full feature SQL Server, whether you run on premises or Azure, it's the same. That capability is something that we wanted to highlight. So if you see here, let me shift. I wanted to show you really quickly. If you want to try out SQL Server 2014, there is probably no better platform than on Azure, right? So we've introduced this image on Azure platform. Basically takes few minutes for you to kind of install it in a VM and take it for a test drive, faster than you can download the entire ISO image. So if you haven't already, I'd highly encourage you to give it a try. All right. So in terms of SQL 14 investments, you heard about it in the keynote, all the great features that are coming. You talked about the in-memory OLTP, which is the in-memory engine that we are now supporting for OLTP workload. We already supported that for data warehousing. We have a separate focus for private cloud and hybrid cloud. So I'm going to focus on the private cloud and the hybrid cloud investments. And what you see here are a set of investments that, some of them are available in CTP1, some of them will be coming in CTP2, which is our next CTP before we release to manufacturing. So I want to focus on the private cloud. Dharmadi hinted on a lot of these features in his section. Why, when he said, the framework that he proposed, a lot of these features were, essentially aligning with that framework. So I'll kind of go through this in detail one by one. But you can see that both private cloud and hybrid cloud, from a SQL Server point of view, it's very symmetric, right? A lot of these features that work on a hybrid situation where a SQL Server application spans on-premises and a public cloud, it works just as well if it's running only in private cloud or in public cloud, right? So from a SQL Server point of view, all of these combinations or possibilities are completely valid, right? So let me go through each of these, private cloud enhancements and hybrid cloud enhancements. The first one is sysprep enhancement, right? So how many of you actually use sysprep? I know you raised your hand, but how many of you use sysprep today in your deployments? Okay, a couple of them. So for folks who don't know about sysprep, the primary value proposition of sysprep is to be able to customize your SQL Server deployment in a way that you can actually do a copy many time operation, right? So you customize for your IT department's requirements and compliance requirements. And once you package it, you can essentially stamp out multiple copies of that deployment over hundreds if not thousands of virtual machines, right? So the obvious benefit here is reduction in terms of end-to-end deployment time, right? If you're managing a huge form of SQL servers, sysprep obviously helps there. In SQL Server 2012, which is our previous version of SQL Server, sysprep didn't support few things. There were a few deficiencies, if you will, right? And those are the deficiencies that we are addressing in SQL Server 2014. Chief among them is the ability to support SQL Server clustering in sysprep mode, right? So if you have SQL Server failover clustering, you have a couple of machines that are clustered through SQL Server. Before, if you wanted to sysprep, you have to do them individually, right? Say if your cluster had about 5, 6, 7 nodes, you have to do this 6 times, 7 times, right? So now what we've done is we've announced support for sysprepping the entire cluster at once. So what this allows you to do is to again reduce the end-to-end deployment time. This capability will be something that you can actually try out, evaluate, and give us feedback in CTP2. But this is something that I think a lot of customers in private cloud have been asking, if you will. And this capability builds on top of some of the additional enhancements that we released early this year in SQL Server 2012 SP1, right? SP1 CU2 to be specific. And those enhancements refers to these things. Also in SQL Server 2012, we weren't supporting sysprep of analysis services, the integration services or the shared features, which is primarily the SSMS tools. All these enhancements went in January as part of the update. Now the sysprep support for clusters builds on top of that, right? So with this enhancement, we have completed the journey in terms of being able to support SQL Server in all its glory with sysprep, right? So again, this is something that took us a couple of releases, but we are at a point where customers can take advantage of it. The second feature I wanted to talk about is called buffer pool extension. If you remember, Dharmadi talked about a capability in Windows Server 2012 called tiered storage spaces. And the basic idea is simple, right? You have 2 tiers of storage that an application can use or Windows can use to optimize for performance, right? So you have a faster medium and then you have a slower medium. The basic idea is to keep all your hot data or warm data in the faster medium and then destage some of the low, least access data in the disks, right? So that way you're taking advantage of this faster medium for the things that are most important for your application, right? Basically, it's the same concept, except it's happening within SQL Server. So if you run SQL Server on a machine with a whole bunch of SSD, you already have some memory, right, RAM. You have some disks already. That's where your data files and log files are stored. So in addition, if you had this non-volatile medium with SSDs, SQL Server can spill over its data cache, the buffer pool cache, into this medium and destage least accessed pages to the disk, right? So what this helps is without making any changes in your application. It's completely transparent. All you have to do is a dynamic configuration that says, here is my buffer pool extension and here is the file name. And SQL Server automatically figures out which pages are hot in your memory and actually puts it on a faster medium, right? So this is something that works really well for read-heavy OLTP workloads. What we have seen is for data warehouse type of workloads, you don't see a whole lot of benefit because, they are write intensive. But if you have OLTP read-heavy workloads, especially in configurations that are commodity servers, right? Think of servers that are 32 gigs of RAM, right? So that's a perfect sweet spot for this feature where, you should be able to just, if you buy like anywhere between 2 to 3 times the size of memory in terms of SSDs, you can see, improvements anywhere from 5 to 10x, right? Without changing anything in your app. SQL Server automatically figures out your hot pages and, uses this faster SSD medium to give you, superior performance. And like you said, like you can see here, the configuration is pretty straightforward. It's dynamic. It doesn't require any restart of SQL Server. So this is something that is available in CTP1. I would encourage you guys to try it and give us feedback, so we can address any of the issues before we ship. All right, the next enhancement or the set of enhancements I want to talk about is online ops enhancement. The basic idea here is today customers, when they do maintenance of their database, right, specifically around index management, it essentially has an impact on your primary workload. Right? Every time, a couple of examples that I would give is online index rebuild. SQL Server in 2012 does support online index rebuild, but the issue is if you have like say 100 partitions, you have to do online index rebuild for all the 100 partitions. Now you can imagine if you have a workload that is running and doing an index management on 100 partitions is going to have a significant impact on your workload, right? So what customers typically do is they find a time in the day when they can do this without impacting their primary workload. Now in SQL Server 2014, what we have done is the ability to do online index rebuild per partition. And what this means is you don't have to do it, all or none. You can do it one partition at a time, and you can actually do it in a rolling fashion, right? So your chances are your application is not accessing all the partitions, right? Because the data by definition is partitioned and you're only accessing the data set that you require. So this actually helps increase the uptime of your application, right? So the impact from doing online index rebuild is minimized. The other aspect of enhancement that we make with the database management is managing the lock priority. So in simple terms, what this means is, again, when you do online index rebuild, even if you're doing it at a partition level, there are certain operations where the database has to take a full lock. Basically, if you are doing any queries, there are times where everything is blocked. because we have to rebuild certain indexes. There are certain database operations that require everything to be constant, right? Now, what we have seen from some of our top customers running some large mission critical workloads is that even that kind of downtime is unacceptable. They have to be up 24/7, being able to respond to peak demand, right? So for those kind of workloads, what we've introduced is the ability to specify the priority. Say I am a DBA and I am actually doing online index rebuild or table switching, for example, at a partition level. Now I can tell SQL Server, hey, I think this is very important, but if there is a query that is coming with this particular signature, I want it to let go, right? I don't want it to block, right? So you could actually go that level of granularity and tell SQL Server, and this flexibility allows again to kind of increase your app uptime, right? The application uptime increases with a combination of these features. Again, this feature is available in CTP1. I would encourage you guys to try the SQL 14 image either on Azure or download on-prem and give us feedback. The third thing that I'm actually going to show a demo of this is IO resource governance. Dharmadi mentioned this as well. How many of you use resource governor today? This is a feature that we introduced in 2008, SQL Server 2008. So resource governor, for just to kind of summarize what that feature is all about. It's about ability to implement predictable performance within SQL Server. Think of a scenario here, right? So you have a big instance of SQL Server running workloads that are reporting based, running workloads that are running some of the mission critical queries, right? Chances are the mission critical queries are more important for you than the reporting workloads, right? But you need a way to communicate to SQL Server and say, hey, this is more important than the other. And that essentially is what resource governor allows you to do. It allows you to define queries into groups and prioritize them and also put caps and bounds. So a query that is not as important cannot take over the resources of an entire machine. So there is this concept of query groups or workload groups, and then there is a corresponding concept of resource pools. And the resource pool is defined by a certain amount of memory, certain amount of CPU. And in SQL 14, we are introducing the ability to also specify IO caps, right? In SQL Server 2012, you can only do, definition of resource governor on CPU and memory. Now in 2014, a lot of customers have been asking us to support, IOPS, and we've been supporting that. And in essence, what this allows, again, is to complete the journey. Now SQL Server is complete in terms of being able to resource govern different queries, that is running within the instance. And you can even, associate these queries to a database and in essence, have an SLA model, right? Have a specific SLA for certain databases over the other. And this is one of the top requests for some of our partners who are actually, hosting SQL Server database. Like for example, customers who have large private cloud installations where you have a whole lot of consolidation happening at the instance level. You would need this ability to be able to predict, performance at an individual database level or a query level, right? So I'm going to quickly show you a demo of this. So what you see here, so what I have here is basically a VM where I have installed the SQL Server 2014 CTP. And what I'm going to do is start with just introducing a resource governor. It's pretty simple. I'm just creating a resource pool, right? I'm calling a couple of these statements, and I'm saying I'm also creating a workload group. This is what I would classify a given query when it comes through to say go into this group versus the other. And the way I do that is by defining a function, a classifier function that allows me to, whenever a query or a connection comes through, I'm able to tell SQL Server if a query comes on a particular database, it has to be classified into a particular group. So I have basically two groups and two pools, right? And if you think of a scenario where I am the hoster and I have two customers, one is paying more than the other, and I need to be able to provide some differentiation in their performance, right? So that's my basic problem statement. So I have two pools, two groups. Now what I want to do is I want to run a workload. And before I do that, I want to enable resource governor. I'm not setting any configuration. All I'm doing is I'm enabling resource governor, and I'm setting the default values, right? So you can see here, all I'm doing is just enabling resource governor and setting the default values for input-output operation. And now what I have is a simple app that basically, runs a read workload. And the reason I'm running a read workload is this, for demonstration purposes, it really shows you the ability of SQL Server to kind of demonstrate this throttling capability at the I/O level, right? So what you see here is 2 workloads essentially running 16 threads each. Think of these as the workload my 2 customers are running, right? And you can see that they are kind of fighting for these resources, right? They're going back and forth. You see the performance counter up, the red and the blue, they're kind of going back and forth. But overall, they are kind of doing okay in terms of sharing resources, right? Now, what I wanted to do is, let's say, customer 1. Oh, sorry. Yeah. Let's say customer 1 wants to increase the workload, right? So what I'm going to do is stop this workload. I want to increase this to 32 threads. And I want to start this. Now you can see suddenly my customer 2 is suffering from a noisy neighbor impact, because suddenly my other customer, he decided to increase his workload. My customer 2, who's actually my most preferred customer, is actually suffering. He calls me and says, hey, I'm paying more. I'm supposed to be your gold partner, but look at this. Somebody who's not your preferred customer is actually having an impact on me, right? So as a hoster, what I want to do now is put a minimum guaranteed IOPS for my preferred customer, right? So that's what I'm going to do here. I have a minimum guaranteed IOPS of 750. And look at what happens when I execute that. Suddenly my customer 2 workload is able to kind of gain its share. There is a minimum guaranteed number of IOPS that he gets, and you can see the blue line now trying to kind of get back, even though the other workload has more threads. It's disproportionately doing more work, but because the customer 2 is my preferred customer, I'm able to kind of guarantee certain set of IOPS. Now this is still not good enough for me, because I am worried that my customer 1, who's kind of not the premium customer, he's paying basically commodity price, I worry that he's going to get used to getting the entire system, right? A simple example is, say if customer workload 2 is done with their work, customer workload 1, even though they're paying, not paying me any premium, they're taking over the entire machine. And I don't like that, because tomorrow they're going to complain saying, hey, yesterday I got the entire machine, today I'm not getting it. It's not predictable, right? So what I want to do now is I want to put a cap in terms of maximum IOPS my customer workload 1, because they are not paying me top price, and I want to be able to make sure that they get a certain amount, but not more than that, right? So that's what I've done. So basically I have put a max cap of 600, right? And you can see that it's not taking over the entire system. And then if I actually start my second workload again, and basically I have 2 customers, one who's paying me the premium and I'm giving them a guaranteed minimum IOPS, and another customer who's basically, think of it as taking whatever is available in the system, and I am putting a max cap. And if you look at perfmon, things are more predictable on both sides. My preferred customer is getting the preferred treatment for the money they pay, and my cheap customer, essentially they get whatever is left out of the system without going over the boundaries. And the perfmon counter here clearly shows the separation, right? And this is essentially the scenario a lot of private cloud vendors are asking for, right? A lot of hosters are asking for, where there is huge multi-tenancy and you want to solve this problem of noisy neighbor. All right. So let me go to the next feature. Now we are transitioning to hybrid cloud. And as Dharmadi mentioned, the definition of hybrid cloud is where you have one of your foot in on-premises and your other foot in a public cloud, right? Whether Azure or any other cloud provider. Now this feature that is available in CDP1, again, I'll encourage you guys to try this out and give us feedback. The primary goal of this feature is to be able to take a database, a SQL Server database that is living on-premises, and move it or copy it to a SQL Server instance running in Azure VM, but do so in very simple steps, right? So what we are delivering in CTP1 is a simple wizard in SSMS. You go to the database, right click, as you can see in the picture, and say deploy to Windows Azure VM. And you fill in few parameters, and everything is done behind the scenes, right? Going and accessing the portal, all you have to give is a Windows Azure account, and we'll actually create the VM for you, we'll actually install SQL Server for you, and we'll actually do the copy of the database as well. So the primary reason we did this feature is to lower that barrier of entry. So you don't have to worry about learning new concepts. It's a familiar tool with SSMS. It's just the same experience that you used to, except now you can actually take advantage of the cheaper VMs and pay as you go, pay by the minute, if you will, right? So this is a really good tool if you are considering doing development and test in Azure, right? Cloud backup. So Dharmadi hinted on this as well. This is also a hybrid feature. And in simplicity, all this does is being able to have your on-premise databases back up to Azure storage, right? And why? Why would anybody want to do that? You're doing it over the internet. Well, the answer is pretty simple. Windows Azure storage is extremely cheap compared to on-premises. It is infinite, limitless in terms of how much capacity it has, right? You basically can scale to how, terabytes, if you will, in terms of backup space. And 3, it's already redundant. Every data block that is stored in Windows Azure storage is replicated thrice. So out of the cloud, you're essentially getting 3 copies. So practically, you're not going to lose it. It has an SLA behind it, 395 SLA, as well as it is geo-replicated, right? So this is a capability that you want to take advantage for your on-premise databases, right? So what we have done is, in January, we shipped this feature where just right out of your simple backup statement, we added the support to specify an Azure storage, right? The URL. And it's very simple. It's integrated into SQL Server, so you don't have to go and rewrite your app or scripts besides just pointing to the Azure storage. As long as you have a storage account and a key, you're good to go. A lot of customers are using it, and they're finding a lot of good value out of this. Now, what we are doing in SQL 14 is one step on top of this, right? So you have a simple backup statement, and in SQL 14, what we are doing is we are implementing an agent that allows you to do this at an instance level. So you can go to the SQL Server instance and say, back up all my databases to Azure storage, and here is the storage account, right? And what that does, that agent, it looks at your database activity. All the databases in your instance, it monitors the activity, and it figures out. It's smart enough to figure out if you need to actually take a full backup or a differential backup, right? So it simplifies the whole backup strategy management into 2 parameters that you need to specify. You got to tell where you want to store the backups, and you also need to tell what is your retention period, right? How long do you want to keep these backups? Just those 2 parameters, as you can see. It's a pretty simple stored procedure that we are implementing, and the agent knows about your workload and optimizes how much space you need to allocate for your backup, right? And in essence gives you a sense of guarantee that if you specify 30 days, for the 30 days that the backup agent is going to manage you should be able to recover back, right? Now this feature, it happens to work from on-premises or SQL Server running in Azure VM, or for that matter anywhere else where SQL Server runs. And I think that is a key point here, right? SQL Server technology can work in any one of these deployment models, whether it's running on a physical machine, a virtual machine, an Azure virtual machine, or an Amazon virtual machine. The last feature that I want to talk about is it's called SQL Server in Windows Azure Storage Integration. Now this takes the hybrid value prop one level further, right? And it's a little hard to understand when you first think about it, right? Now basically what we are saying here is SQL Server on premises, right? You have all your database files and log files. This feature allows you to take certain database files and log files and place it into Azure storage. Remember, we are not talking about backup. We are talking about actually placing your database files and log files in Azure storage. Now you would wonder, why would I want to do that? I mean, I'm going over internet, I have network latency, why would I ever bother to do this, right? Well, what we've heard from customers is a couple of things. One, when they think about adoption and migration to cloud, they want to do it at incremental stages, right? And today, in their deployments, they have SQL Server instances with hundreds of databases. Not all databases are ready to be moved to cloud. So they want this flexibility to say, I want to keep my instance on premises. I don't want to lose control. Everything is configured. I have the whole security compliance figured out. But I want to try out cloud, and I want to make it as easy as possible to maybe perhaps just move one database to the cloud without installing a VM, right? And that's what this feature allows you to do, right? Your SQL Server instance is completely present on premises. You can select a database that you want to actually put on Azure storage, and the SQL Server instance would manage both the database that is located in Azure storage as well as local on-premise storage, right? And there's this capability then allows you to unlock a lot of hybrid scenarios, right? One of the interesting hybrid scenarios we heard from our customer, especially Microsoft IT, is if you're using TDE, backup encryption, right? TDE-based backup encryption, you can actually store your certificates on-prem, which is much more secure and under your control, but the data that is encrypted itself is in Azure storage. Now, that is an interesting scenario that we weren't able to implement in the previous releases, but with the ability to directly talk to Azure storage, now you can implement some really interesting scenarios such as this, right? And obviously, all the benefits of Azure storage is something that you will take advantage of. The cheap storage, the limitless scale of the Azure storage, and its triple redundancy, right? So all these are capabilities that now you can take advantage right from your SQL Server on premises. So let me do a quick demo of this capability. So what I have here, so I have two machines, and what I wanted to kind of demonstrate is, I want to demonstrate the ability to kind of attach and detach, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a master key, right? And this is just basically a simple SQL Server database master key. And then I'm basically going to back up that certificate, right, to a local storage. It looks like I already have the permission. So what I'll do here is I'll delete these. I'll regenerate, because I regenerated the key, I have to back up my certificate again. So I do that, right? And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a database, and before that I need to provide the storage account credentials, right? So all I'm doing is I'm creating a SQL Server credential, I'm specifying my storage account, and I'm specifying my container, and I'm saying here is the key, right? In order for me to do that, what I'm going to show you is this open source tool. It's actually in Coreplex called Azure Storage Explorer. And here is basically my container and storage account. And I'm going to say, generate me a shared access key, right? So I'm actually asking this tool to say, create me a shared access key. And let's see. And I'm saying I want a public container. And I'm saying, give me read, write, delete, and list permissions. And generate a signature for me, right? And what I'm going to do now is copy this signature, right? And then I'm going to paste this right here in my T-SQL statement. And that's my credential, right? And all I'm going to do is create a credential. Create a credential here. Credential with 1 second. Right? I've got the credential now. Now all I have to do is just create this database with this credential, and you can see basically I have foo2.mdf and foo2log.mdf, and if I execute the statement, you'll see that it takes a couple of minutes, just like a couple of seconds, just like how you create a database on premises on your local disk, but it's actually creating the file in Azure storage, right? So I execute this. And once this operation is done, let me go back to my storage explorer. And if I do this now, you can see I have foo2 log and foo2.mdf, right? So what I have now demonstrated to you is the ability to have an on-prem SQL Server instance. You haven't changed anything to that SQL Server, but you specified and created a bunch of database files in Azure storage, right? Fully secure, but nothing has changed in terms of your on-prem SQL Server footprint. Now this allows you to demonstrate that you can actually start creating databases that are stored in Azure storage, which someday you can then say, hey, you know what, I actually want to stand up my VM also there, right? And I'll demonstrate that really quickly. So now I am in a situation where I have one machine with a bunch of databases on premises on my local disk and a couple of databases on, in Azure. So I go to my next machine, and what I'm going to do here is, in order for me to actually access this database that is in Azure storage, I have to basically create the same key, right? Because I have to make sure that I have the same certificate. And if you see here in the statement in T-SQL, I am actually sharing the same thumbprint. The certificate has to be the same. So in order for me to do this, I go back to my first machine, and I open up my certificate folder, and I want to copy this certificate. I'm saying, let's copy this. And I'm going to my second machine. I'm saying, okay, let me put this back on the same folder here. Copy and replace. Copy and replace. And I go back to my machine. And I say, okay, now let me create a certificate. Right? Did that. And I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to create the same credential here. So what I'm going to do here is go back to my machine 1, copy that credential, the shared access key that I created through the Azure Storage Explorer, copy it, put it on my second machine, create the same credential there. So, right? Then I'm creating this. Now this is the cool part. So now all I've done is I've created the same exact security enhancements on both, and currently the database is attached to machine 1. So what I want to do is I want to detach this database here on the first machine, right? So let me skip this. Actually, before I do that, let me do this following. I want to insert some data, right? So I created the database, and you can see the credentials, right, that I created. I'm encrypting the database with TDE. I'm altering the database to turn the encryption on, and you can see the encryption on. And then I'm going to insert a bunch of data, right? Think of this as highly confidential social security number of some sort, right? And I can say when I do a select, I have a bunch of data. Now what I want to do is I want to detach this database from machine 1. Remember, the database is actually stored in cloud. So I want to just detach this database, right? Now I go to my other machine and say, I just want to attach it right there, right? So basically what I'm going to say is use master, create database foo, and you notice it that I'm saying attach from that location. And that's it. You essentially move the entire database from one machine to another machine without actually copying it. Now what this demonstrates is the ability to kind of separate compute from storage, which is quite powerful. This is something that we haven't done in databases for a long time. And with this kind of clean separation, now you can actually scale each of them independently. So if you have a database that's going to grow significantly, that you have to grow your compute at the same time. Now this is a feature that you can use to kind of prove a lot of that capability. All right, so we are very close to getting done. So let me finish a last couple of slides. So I'll actually give it to Dharmadi so he can talk about some of the customer proof points that we have.
Yep. So we want you to see that there are many customers starting to move to Hyper-V and all that. We have customers that actually running VMware before, now they move to Hyper-V. But actually I want to share with you this thing. This is more important. is the stuff that we talk about today on private cloud. We actually create, this is almost a 100-page white paper that has all the best practices that we put in there. So definitely for you guys to do, to install it and then follow the steps that we outlined here. I hope you're very excited like us about SQL Server 2014 and the latest version of Windows Server as well to help you deploy your database in private cloud environment and gives you a good preparation like what Madan demonstrated to move to public cloud and hybrid cloud in the near future. Right? We'll be here in the next few minutes. If you guys want to chat with us, we'll be here. But thank you for coming for this session. Hopefully you're excited about SQL Server 2014. Thanks.
Great, thank you.